Hi, I am Sherlock. Welcome to my new mystery case.
I confess it was one of those damp London evenings when the fog behaved like an inquisitive guest, insinuating itself at every keyhole and pressing its clammy fingers against the panes of our sitting room in Baker Street. The lamps along the Marylebone Road wavered in their halos as though each flame were caught in a private struggle against suffocation, and the street beyond our window appeared not so much a thoroughfare as a corridor in which shadows were forever passing from one door to another. Holmes, who had spent the afternoon stretched at languid length upon the settee, his long hands clasped behind his head and his keen eyes fixed upon a hairline crack in the ceiling, had said little beyond a dry remark on the insufficient virtues of London coal. Thus I had returned to my medical journals and the welcome sobriety of their Latin diagnoses, which, if they did not improve a man's spirits, at least gave him a respectable reason to sigh. It was near upon 7 when the bell rang with a violence more suggestive of panic than etiquette. Mrs. Hudson's tread came and went in a flurry. The door flew open, and our landlady ushered in a lady whose first impression was of that composed desperation one sees in those who have rehearsed their grief for society, and now at last must live it in earnest. She was handsome without ostentation, of an age I should put near 36, and dressed in mourning so recently adopted that the lustre had not yet gone from the jet beads that trembled at her throat. The veil she raised from her face threw her features into a pale relief, and I saw a pair of dark eyes as steady as a soldier's, even while the breath at her lips fluttered like a frightened bird. "Mr. Sherlock Holmes," said she with the firm decision of one who has climbed many stairs in her mind before trusting her feet to the first, "I am Constance, Countess of Whitmore." Holmes had already risen. With that deferential ease which made even his enemies admit to his breeding, he indicated the chair nearest the fire and drew it a trifle forward. "You do me honour, Lady Whitmore," he returned. "Pray be seated. You have come at a time when your case may have all the attention it deserves." She sank into the chair, and for a moment cradled her gloved hands one within the other. "I have come," she said, "because my sister has performed her last dance, and I do not know who led her to it." There was in the phrasing of this speech something so singular that even I, no stranger to melodrama in Holmes's rooms, felt a prickle along my scalp. Holmes inclined his head a fraction. "Your sister?" "Lady Adelaide Piercy," the Countess answered, "known in society as Lady Whitmore until her marriage. You will have read, perhaps, of her collapse last evening at the Whitmore ball." "I have read," Holmes said, "the bald line in the morning edition, that there was an unfortunate incident at your family's house in Portland Place, and that the festivities were curtailed. The name was not given." "By the insistence of our solicitor and the physician," she replied, with a trace of bitterness. "They would spare us from the public raven, but the raven is already at the window, Mr. Holmes. My sister died last night in the great ballroom at the final quadrille. She died while standing and, God help me, while smiling, as if to a partner whom no one could see." I could not suppress an exclamation. Holmes's gaze, which had been contemplative, grew suddenly more acute. "Pray take your time, Lady Whitmore. Begin at the point farthest back that still bears upon the present, and do not fear to linger where others would hurry." The Countess nodded. "We hold our ball each spring. It is as certain as the season. My sister Adelaide was the soul of it, the one who arranged the music and the supper, who glided on the arm of titled dullness without appearing to notice the weight, who made the wallflowers bloom with a word. She had enemies, as all women must, who possess what others covet, but none whom I would call dangerous. She was, in short, beloved." Last night she seemed as she always is, radiant, attentive, the very hostess. If there was any change, it was only that she danced the last set, the La Tempête, without a gentleman to lead her. Without a partner, said I. Surely the figures would not admit. They admitted it well enough, the Countess said, turning to me with the gravest courtesy. Those who stood nearest said they perceived a curious little hesitation in the company, as though those about her gave way to a presence they did not choose to dispute. Adelaide laughed. "Oh, I hear it now," and took her place. She moved through the pattern with the grace of a girl. At the conclusion, she made a small curtsy, not toward the orchestra nor to the company, but to her left-hand side. Then she pressed her fingers to her breast as if a pin had slipped and did not rise again. Holmes steepled his hands. "The physician?" "Sir Malvern Hatherley, our family doctor. He was in attendance, as he always is when we entertain largely. He declared it the heart. He would have had the room cleared and the matter closed, but the police were already in the house upon another errand." "The police?" I cried. "Inspector Lestrade of Scotland Yard," said the Countess. "He had come, as it appears, to arrest a gentleman we had the misfortune to invite, Mr. Basil Trenchard, on a matter of forgery. He was with Lestrade in the library when Adelaide fell. The inspector, hearing the commotion, came at once." Holmes's eye gleamed for a bare instant at the name of our old acquaintance, but if he entertained any private satisfaction, he kept it from his voice. "So the Yard was present by accident, and Lady Adelaide's death, declared natural by the physician, remained in that category?" "It did, until this morning," the Countess answered, and here her composed despair trembled. "I went to Adelaide's rooms to choose the gown in which she would—" She mastered herself. "There is a little escritoire she always kept locked. The key, which she wore upon a slender chain, was not upon her person. We forced the drawer. Inside lay her dancing card from last night. It is the custom at our house that the hostess does not fill her card beyond a few sets. Yet this one was filled, every line, with the same hand and the same name, written over and over, as though the writer had not learned to vary it. There were but 2 words: Last Dance. We were silent. The fog pressed harder, drumming a soft, muffled cadence upon the glass. "And there is this," the Countess continued, drawing from her reticule a small parcel wrapped in tissue. Holmes took it with a delicacy one accorded to relics or explosives. He unfolded the paper to reveal a white glove of kid, left hand, with a row of pearl buttons. What made it extraordinary was the faint grey impression upon the palm, an oval, as if some seal had kissed it in soot and powder. "Adelaide wore those at supper," said the Countess, "but when she died she had no gloves. This one was found beneath the pianoforte upon which the musicians stacked their scores. The impression, Sir Malvern says it is nothing, a smudge, yet I have seen my sister's correspondence. She kept among her letters an old seal she said belonged to our grandmother, a small oval with the figure of a stag and the Latin word vivat. That seal is also gone." "Ah," Holmes murmured, with a warmth that in him meant the first stirrings of engagement. He lifted the glove to the lamplight, turned it, and brought it close to his face, not to scent it, as I expected, but to study the minute abrasions at the cuff. "And Mr. Basil Trenchard?" "Lestrade took him, protesting, before midnight. But Mr. Holmes," the Countess leaned forward, "I do not think my sister died of any heart attack. There were too many little things. Her locket, an oval of blue enamel, was missing when we laid her out. A young violinist from the orchestra insists that in the closing bars Adelaide whispered, 'Thank you,' to the empty air. The butler swears the ballroom clock, which has run faultlessly for years, stopped at the instant she fell and cannot be made to go again. And she hesitated, as if crossing an invisible line. There is the matter of the note in the Morning Post. Holmes made the slightest motion of his hand. In the personal column, she said, it reads, A. As agreed, the last is granted. Wait for the stag at midnight. It was placed 3 days past. Holmes laid the glove upon the table with the reverence one gives to an instruction. When he spoke, his voice had lost its languor and had taken on that spare, tensile quality which seemed to clear the very air about us. Lady Whitmore, you were right to come. I promise you that before your sister is committed to the earth, we shall know whether she was called by Providence or by a human hand, clumsy or devilishly deft. You will permit me, I hope, to view the ballroom, the escritoire, and whatever remains of last night's arrangements. All is at your command, she said, rising. Only— her composure wavered. Only do not let them write that she died of scandal. If there is guilt, fix it where it belongs. Adelaide has danced among malice all her life. She should not have to bow to it in death. Holmes took up his hat and allowed himself the ghost of a smile. My dear Lady Whitmore, I have never yet known malice to keep time as well as a waltz. When it attempts a quadrille, it treads on toes. We shall see whose. And with that, while the fog pressed its face more closely to the glass, we went out into the London evening, following a lady who had come to ask us, not for comfort, but for truth. The fog accompanied us like a resentful footman to Portland Place, where the Whitmore house rose from the murk with the sober dignity that fortune wears after 3 generations. Within, lilies and beeswax contended with the flat, metallic breath of extinguished candles. We were admitted by a butler whose self-command had been pared to the last thread. He bowed to the Countess and looked to Holmes with that peculiar hope which the desperate reserve for a final resource, then conducted us without preface to the ballroom. It was a glittering cavern abruptly put to silence. Garlands drooped over mirrors, programmes lay abandoned upon chairs. The musicians' dais held a drift of scores and a muffled pianoforte. At the far end, a tall bracket clock offered, with injured patience, 12 minutes to midnight, and no further. Lady Whitmore's breath caught. She tightened her gloves and stood, with the rigid composure of one who knows the eyes of a household. Holmes's face had shed its languor, his glance moved like a thin blade over the scene. He went first to the clock and opened the glass with a surgeon's nicety. A touch to the pendulum told him what he wished. "Sprung," he said, and closed the case with the tenderness he affords both wounded birds and venturesome experiments. He traced the cornice with a forefinger, paused over a pale heel sweep upon the skirting, and only then acknowledged the knot of persons waiting near the terrace doors. Inspector Lestrade detached himself from them with a prim smile that did not reach his vigilant eyes. "Trust you to smell murder when the doctor has written heart," he observed. "There is no mark upon her, Mr. Holmes." "I seldom rely upon the obliging wound," Holmes answered. His gaze alighted on a chalk fleck, no larger than a fingernail near the arch by which the dancers had entered. "Place me at the instant, if you please." "Where did Lady Adelaide fall?" Lestrade indicated a point 2/3 down the floor. "There, at the last figure." She dipped, smiled, and folded like a curtain. Sir Malvern bawled for air. I had just come from the library, where Mr. Basil Trenchard protested that his handwriting is a victim of conspiracy. The commotion improved his eloquence. "Did Trenchard know the lady?" "Only at supper, so he swears. I cannot prove otherwise." Lestrade's glance brushed the Countess and returned. I have seen men fall for less than a forged bill. I have not seen a clock fall with them. Holmes measured the space with 3 long strides, then paused at the terrace doors. His hand rested upon the gilt handle, where a faint oval dampness suggested a grasp not quite dried. "Someone took the air without haste," he said. "A hurried exit wounds metal. Here there is warmth, but no scratch." He went to one knee and teased from between 2 boards a silvered hairpin flattened at the curve. He held it to the lamp. "False pearls upon a quality mount, not the hostess's taste." "Adelaide wore sapphires," the Countess said. "She would not have trusted a cheap pin." "Just so." Holmes passed the trifle to Lestrade, whose studied indifference did not conceal attention. Behind the pianoforte, the dust bore the oval smear of a left-hand glove, the fellow of that which lay upon our sitting-room table an hour before. Holmes did not disturb it. "We will see the escritoire," he said, "but first the card." Lady Whitmore produced a small rectangle from her reticule. It was filled from corner to corner with the same 2 words, written again and again with unmusical regularity: "Last Dance." Holmes turned it obliquely to the light. At 2 points the ink had beaded, as if the nib hesitated upon a yielding surface. He touched the edge and looked toward the dais. "Not written upon a knee," he murmured, "nor at supper. Written upon something that remembers pressure." "Does it signify?" Lestrade asked. "In time it will." Holmes's gaze returned to the arrested clock. "A reliable instrument, and a healthy woman fail at one instant. I respect Sir Malvern. I distrust coincidence. We shall call upon him after the rooms." The ascent to Lady Adelaide's apartments possessed that hush peculiar to houses into which death has stepped by the front door. Servants watched us with the mournful alertness of those who hope the impossible may yet be produced from a sleeve. The chamber to which the Countess led us was orderly and bright, the fire judicious, the curtains half drawn. Upon the dressing-table lay the undisturbed trivialities of life: a brush threaded with a gilt strand, a saucer containing 2 loose pearl buttons, a locket case open and empty. Holmes went to the window first. It gave upon a rear mews where a stable lamp pricked the mist. The lower sash was locked. Along the outer sill, a combing of ash showed where a spent vesta had been snapped and shaken. He touched the dust and then his tongue. "Recent," he said. "No rain upon it yet." At the escritoire he pressed the velvet lining of the central drawer and bade me feel. Beneath the nap lay a curious softness, like a cushion that remembered hands. "Horsehair," I said. "Precisely, a surface to betray the lingering of a pen. The card was written here and replaced. Whoever used the hostess's key kept it." He looked to the Countess. "Have the household keys examined. One will be missing." "It is hers," she answered. "The chain was about her throat when she dressed. It is not there now." Holmes stepped behind the dressing screen and returned with a narrow ribbon of blue enamel snapped cleanly at one end. "The chain failed under strain," he said. "Whoever relieved Lady Adelaide of her locket did so in a press and discovered at once that they had omitted the pendant. They will regret that omission." The brightness I knew so well came into his eyes. "Lestrade, send for Mr. Trenchard's gloves and his dance card. Inquire also which lady left early with her hair awry. A flattened pin is the companion of haste. And let the butler fetch Lady Adelaide's slippers." "Her slippers?" I asked. "Those she wore at the last figure. If she danced with a partner visible only to herself, her soles will tell me whether he led her to the left or to the truth." Holmes requested the slippers with an insistence that brooked no delay, and soon enough the butler brought them forth, carefully wrapped in brown paper, as if they themselves were evidence of a sacrilege. They were delicate satin shoes, pale ivory in colour, the soles faintly darkened from the waxed floor of the ballroom. Holmes set them upon a small table, leaned close, and ran his magnifying glass across their undersides. His lips tightened, and I recognized in the play of his features that same gleam I had seen when he traced a trail invisible to all but himself. "Watson," he said quietly, "you observe these scuffs? The left shoe carries a distinct pressure at the outer edge of the toe, while the right bears none such. Were she merely moving alone through the quadrille, the balance would be symmetrical. Instead, she yielded continually toward her left. Someone, or something, exerted influence there. I bent low, but I confess I could see nothing beyond faint smears of chalky residue. Could this not be the natural effect of a lady dancing alone, a hesitation in her balance?" Holmes shook his head. "Too consistent. A dancer improvising without a partner shifts her weight irregularly. Here the marks repeat with the rhythm of the figure, precise as the beats of a metronome. Lady Adelaide was led. Lady Whitmore, who had drawn near in hushed fascination, pressed her hand against her lips. Led, Mr. Holmes, but by whom? The entire floor saw her move unaided." "That," Holmes replied, "is precisely the question we must answer." He returned the slippers to their wrapping with almost paternal care, then motioned Lestrade closer. "Inspector, have you questioned the musicians? Their vantage gives them a clearer line than any guest, for they look upon the floor with fewer distractions than gallantry or champagne." Lestrade admitted with a grunt that he had taken their statements. A fiddler swore she smiled to empty space, and the harpist said she marked the time more gracefully than ever. "Nothing of substance, Holmes." "On the contrary," Holmes said, "substance enough to trouble the ground beneath us. I must speak to them myself. People remember details unconsciously, the twitch of a bow, a figure half-formed, a note spoiled by surprise. They do not know what matters until the right question is asked." We proceeded together back to the ballroom, where two musicians lingered nervously by the dais. A young violinist, pale of complexion, and an older violist with blunt fingers and a wary look. Holmes approached with the gentleness he used when coaxing frightened birds. "You were upon this platform at the moment of Lady Adelaide's final dance?" "Yes, sir," said the younger, his voice trembling. "I played the second violin." "And what did you perceive?" The lad flushed. "I thought she moved as if someone guided her steps. At one point she lifted her arm as if a gentleman's hand were there to receive it. Yet no one stood beside her." "Her eyes?" Holmes asked. "To what did they attend?" "To the left, always to the left, and just before she sank I heard her whisper, as if in gratitude, 2 words only." "The words?" "Thank you, sir." Holmes inclined his head. The faintest stir of triumph flashed across his gaze. He turned to the violist. "And you?" "I saw her curtsy," the man said bluntly. "She faced the far archway there, by the great clock. She dipped as though before a partner of consequence. It chilled my bones, though the music was still sprightly." Holmes asked no more. Instead, he strode to the clock once more, inspecting not only the pendulum, but the floorboards beneath. He crouched, pressing a finger into the narrow groove between the timbers, and drew forth a dark speck that clung to his nail. He held it to the light, then to his tongue. "Watson," he said, "gunpowder." I stared at him in astonishment. "But surely, what has gunpowder to do with a lady's collapse in the midst of a dance?" Everything or nothing, Holmes replied. But the presence of powder near a stopped clock, a vanished locket, and a missing key suggests that we tread not upon coincidence, but upon choreography. Someone orchestrated last night as carefully as the musicians played their notes. Lady Whitmore shuddered. You speak as if Adelaide's death were not the result of fate, but of a plot most monstrous. Holmes looked upon her gravely. My lady, it is my duty to assume design until chance proves itself. We have the glove with the oval imprint, the card scrawled, with its spectral last dance, the broken chain, and now a trace of powder. Each piece waits for its neighbour. I must see Sir Malvern at once. His diagnosis of the heart may be honest, but honesty does not guarantee accuracy. Lestrade, who had grown increasingly uneasy, muttered, If you can prove foul play, Holmes, it will be the devil's own work to tie it to a culprit. Trenchard is guilty of forgeries, not phantom waltzes. Then perhaps, Holmes said with a gleam, he is guilty of both or guilty of neither. The only way forward is evidence, not conjecture. Come, Watson, we go now to the physician, and Lestrade, see that the household staff are not dismissed. One of them knows why Lady Adelaide smiled at shadows. We departed the ballroom, leaving behind its mirrors and its silence, and climbed into the waiting brougham. Holmes pressed his long fingers together, his eyes half closed, but his mind visibly afire. I could sense that the scattered fragments of this sinister puzzle were already arranging themselves in his imagination, though the pattern was not yet clear to me. "Holmes," I ventured, "do you suspect poison?" He did not open his eyes. Perhaps, but poison leaves traces in the body. A physician of competence would see them. Yet here we have a collapse without struggle, a smile without terror, a clock that dies in sympathy. Tell me, Watson, what sort of poison is courteous enough to bow? The question lingered in the fog as we turned toward Harley Street, where Sir Malvern Hatherley awaited us, and with him perhaps the next piece of the riddle that was Lady Adelaide's last dance. The brougham bore us swiftly through the misty thoroughfares, its wheels muffled upon the damp streets, as if London herself conspired to keep silent watch over the errand. Holmes remained sunk in thought, his long fingers pressed against his lips, his eyes half-lidded yet glinting whenever the carriage lamp caught them. I have long grown accustomed to these periods of abstraction, when he retreats into a mental chamber inaccessible to all save his own intellect. Yet that evening, as the horses drew us toward Harley Street, I perceived a tension about him not unlike a violin string wound near to breaking. Sir Malvern Hatherley received us with professional dignity, though he showed irritation at our intrusion upon his evening. He was a stout man with a florid face and iron-grey whiskers, his clothing immaculate, his manner that of one whose pronouncements had long been received without question. His residence reflected the same: dark wood, polished brass, a faint aroma of carbolic and tobacco. He ushered us into a consulting room lined with volumes of medical law and gestured brusquely toward chairs. "You have come, I presume, about Lady Adelaide's unfortunate seizure," he said. "I have already informed the Countess that the cause was organic. Her heart, gentlemen, was unsound. The attack was swift, mercifully so, and beyond the reach of aid." Holmes regarded him with that air of languid courtesy which always veils his keenest observations. "Indeed, Sir Malvern, yet the curious investigator must ask, upon what foundation is that conclusion built? Was there any discoloration about the lips, any muscular rigidity, any evidence beyond the absence of breath?" The physician flushed slightly. "I examined the lady at once. Her pulse had ceased, her pupils were dilated, and there was no sign of external trauma. Her family has long a history of cardiac weakness. It was sufficient." Holmes leaned forward, his gaze sharpening. "And yet, Sir Malvern, you did not order a post-mortem." The doctor's mouth tightened. "Out of respect. A lady of her standing is not subjected to indignities without necessity." "Or perhaps," Holmes murmured, "out of convenience, for what if signs contrary to your diagnosis were to appear? A faint odour upon the lips, for example, a trace of constriction at the throat, a residue of some agent upon glove or glass." The physician stiffened. "You suggest foul play? Absurd. There was no opportunity, no motive I can perceive." "Opportunity," Holmes said, "is often invisible to those who do not search for it. And as for motive, we are but at the threshold." He rose suddenly and crossed to the cabinet where surgical instruments gleamed in a neat row. He touched none, but his eye wandered over them with a curious expression. "Tell me, Sir Malvern, you attended the ball from the beginning?" "I did. I remained in the withdrawing room until summoned." "Then you did not witness the dance?" "No." Holmes's lips curved almost imperceptibly. Curious that one who speaks so confidently of the natural course of events should confess to having seen none of them. The physician bristled. "You insult my skill, sir." Holmes inclined his head. "I test it, nothing more. And permit me to add that Lady Whitmore herself is unsatisfied. She will not rest until her sister's fate is made plain." At this, Sir Malvern faltered. His gaze shifted momentarily toward a writing desk upon which lay a stack of correspondence. Holmes's eyes followed the motion with hawk-like precision. He strode to the desk and, with a glance at the doctor for permission, lifted one envelope between his fingers. It bore no seal, only a smear of dark grey at the corner. Holmes sniffed it lightly, then held it beneath the lamp. "Powder," he murmured. "The same as that upon the ballroom floor." Sir Malvern made a movement as if to snatch it back, but Holmes's voice checked him. "Doctor, if you wish to preserve your reputation, you will explain how this powder comes to be upon your personal correspondence." For a moment the man's colour drained. Then he recovered. "Gunpowder is hardly an uncommon substance in London. Perhaps the footman who delivered the letters had some upon his gloves." "Perhaps," Holmes said, but his tone carried no conviction of belief. He replaced the envelope and turned briskly to me. "Watson, you observed the chain fragment in Lady Adelaide's chamber. Its breakage indicated violence. Coupled with the missing locket and the repeated scrawl upon her dance card, I begin to see the skeleton of this affair. But bones require flesh." Sir Malvern shifted uneasily in his chair. "Gentlemen, I cannot assist you further. If you persist in this line of inquiry, you will distress Lady Whitmore and dishonour Lady Adelaide's memory." Holmes fixed him with a gaze of cold steel. "Truth never dishonours. It is falsehood that soils memory. Good evening, Sir Malvern. We shall not trespass further upon your time until necessity dictates." We departed the house, and once more the fog closed around us. Holmes walked swiftly, his coat flaring in the damp wind, his eyes gleaming as though the mist sharpened his faculties. I caught step beside him. "You distrust Sir Malvern?" I asked. "I distrust all men whose explanations arrive too swiftly and whose eyes betray more than their tongues," he replied. "Mark my words, Watson, there is a thread binding that powder, the vanished locket, and the dance without a partner. When we find the hand that tied it, we shall know who choreographed Lady Adelaide's last performance." We reached Baker Street near midnight. Holmes lit the lamps in our sitting room, spread upon the table the glove, the broken chain, the slippers, and now his notes concerning Sir Malvern. He regarded them as a general might a map before battle. "Each clue," he said softly, "is a step in the dance. Someone guided her, whether by poison, hypnosis, or deception yet to be revealed. Tomorrow, Watson, we return to Portland Place. I must speak with the servants. They are the unseen orchestra in every household. One of them will have struck a discordant note, and when we hear it, we shall be closer to the partner who led Lady Adelaide to her final bow. And with that, Holmes sank into his chair, eyes burning beneath the shadows, the city's nocturnal silence pressing against our windows, as if London itself waited for his conclusion. Morning broke over Baker Street with a grey light that made the fog seem less an intruder than a permanent tenant of London. I rose to find Holmes already at the table, his dressing gown cast aside in favour of his suit, his lean frame bent over a slip of paper upon which he had scrawled notations in his angular hand. The remnants of a meagre breakfast, half a slice of toast and an untasted egg, stood neglected at his elbow. He greeted me with a nod, but no words, his mind still coiled about the night's reflections. "You slept little," I remarked. "Sleep is a luxury, Watson," he said, his voice brisk. The partner who led Lady Adelaide in her last quadrille grows clearer by the hour, though the face remains in shadow. We return to Portland Place at once. The servants' tongues must be loosened, for the orchestra behind society's pageantry always keeps time with secrets. We hailed a cab and were conveyed swiftly through the still damp streets. Upon our arrival, the house presented a sombre appearance, the blinds half drawn, the very air heavy with mourning. The Countess received us in a smaller drawing-room, her dignity unshaken, though her face bore the pale signs of sleeplessness. She expressed gratitude for our persistence, then left us to the butler, who had clearly been instructed to yield to Holmes in all things. Holmes began not with the grandeur of the ballroom, but with the humbler corners of service. He moved through the pantry, the scullery, the servants' hall, speaking with the staff in tones that combined authority with unexpected gentleness. He asked each about the events of the evening, the timing of their duties, the faces they saw, the objects they handled. It was the kitchen maid who provided the first discordant note. "I went to fetch more wine for the gentleman," she said, twisting her apron. But the cellar key was not where it ought to be. The footman said he'd seen Mr. Trenchard slip it back upon the hook when no one watched. He laughed and said it was a jest, but I thought it queer. Holmes pressed her gently. "At what hour was this?" "Not long before midnight, sir, while the dance was still lively." Holmes exchanged a swift glance with me. The cellar, with its shadowed recesses, could serve many purposes besides storing wine. The second note came from the lady's maid who had attended Adelaide. She was a nervous woman, her eyes darting as though every word might be weighed against her loyalty. "Her ladyship bade me fetch the sapphire combs before the final dance," she said. When I returned, she was already upon the floor. Yet the locket she always wore upon her chain was absent. I thought perhaps she had put it aside with her jewels, but it was not there. Holmes's gaze sharpened. "And did she ever remove it before?" "Never, sir. She called it her talisman, said it held a memory she could not part with." Holmes mused aloud. Yet someone saw fit to part her from it that evening, though without the pendant the theft availed little. The butler, who had hovered discreetly nearby, now spoke in a lower tone. "Begging your pardon, sir, but there is another matter. When we carried her from the floor, I heard the faintest ticking sound like a pocket watch wound too tight. Yet no watch was found upon her." Holmes wheeled upon him. "You are certain of this?" "As certain as I stand here. It ceased the moment her head fell back." Holmes's eyes gleamed. "A watch that stops with its owner. Curious, Watson, very curious. There are artifices that measure more than time, devices that conceal as much as they reveal. The missing locket, the broken chain, the stopped clock, and now a hidden mechanism. We advance. Lestrade entered at that moment, his boots marking the hall with official authority. He carried with him 2 items in brown paper. "From Trenchard's lodgings," he said, "his gloves and his dance card from the ball." Holmes opened them swiftly. The gloves bore faint traces of graphite dust, the kind that clings to counterfeiters' tools. But it was the card that commanded his attention. Unlike Lady Adelaide's, it was nearly blank, save for one scrawl upon the final line. The words "La Tempête," written in the same awkward hand as the repeated "last dance" upon hers. Holmes held the 2 side by side, his fingers steady as a surgeon's. "The same hand," he said, "though the pressure differs. One was written in haste, the other with deliberation. Trenchard either conspired with another or found himself drawn into a design he did not comprehend." Lestrade grunted. "So the forger's hand is upon it. That gives me leverage." Holmes raised a finger. "Not so fast, Inspector. To accuse is simple, to prove is another matter. Let us not forget the hairpin by the terrace, nor the powder upon Sir Malvern's letter. There are more players in this dance than one." At this, Lady Whitmore returned, her composure as steady as before. She had overheard enough to know her household teetered upon revelation. "Mr. Holmes," she said softly, "what do you require of me?" "Only patience, my lady," Holmes replied. "But tonight I shall require more than patience. I must recreate the final dance precisely as it occurred. The musicians will be summoned, the floor cleared, and a lady of your stature, or one of your maids if you prefer, must stand where Adelaide stood. Then we shall see whether the phantom partner leaves no trace when invited to the floor once more." Her eyes widened, yet she nodded resolutely. "If it brings us truth, it shall be done." Holmes bowed slightly. "Then, Watson, prepare yourself. Tonight we do not merely observe, we join the quadrille of death, and by its measure we may learn who guided Lady Adelaide to her last bow." The day crept onward with a tension that seemed to permeate every corridor of the Whitmore house. Servants passed in hushed tones, their eyes flitting with curiosity and unease as Holmes issued his quiet instructions. By evening, the grand ballroom was transformed once more into a stage, though this time the mirrors reflected only solemn faces and the glint of lamplight instead of gaiety. The musicians had been recalled, their instruments tuned in subdued whispers, and a scattering of chairs lined the edges as silent witnesses. Holmes stood at the centre of the floor, tall and grave, his keen gaze absorbing every angle of the space. Lady Whitmore had agreed to assist in recreating her sister's final moments. Clad in mourning black rather than the brilliance of festivity, she carried herself with a dignified poise that masked her trembling. Holmes, with surprising gentleness, explained the figures of La Tempête, the lively quadrille that had concluded the evening. She listened intently, then took her place upon the floor as Adelaide had done. "Observe, Watson," Holmes said as the musicians lifted their bows. "Every motion, every hesitation must be studied. Lady Whitmore will follow the steps as best she recalls them. Our task is not to dance, but to see where the unseen intrudes." The music began, slow at first, the notes haunting in the cavernous room. Lady Whitmore moved gracefully, her hands lifted and lowered in time with the prescribed figures. At first there was nothing unusual, only the echo of shoes upon the polished floor and the strained concentration of those present. But as the measures quickened, I saw her falter, ever so slightly toward her left. She adjusted, then faltered again, her balance yielding to an influence not visible to our eyes. Holmes darted forward, his sharp gaze fixed upon the pattern her steps created. Yes, just so. The very same yielding as Adelaide's slippers betrayed. Do you feel it, Lady Whitmore? A tug? An insistence? She gasped faintly, her breath unsteady. I do, Mr. Holmes. It is as though someone walks beside me. I turn to correct myself, yet my body resists as if compelled. The musicians faltered at her distress, but Holmes motioned them to continue. Steady, my lady. Complete the set. We must see where it leads. She obeyed, dipping into the final curtsy at the clock's end of the room. For one dreadful instant her eyes widened, her hand rising to her breast with a shockingly familiar gesture. But she caught herself and straightened, shaken, yet unharmed. The music ceased abruptly. Holmes was beside her at once, steadying her arm. Enough! You have been most courageous. You see, Watson, the repetition is exact. It is no phantom, no madness of grief-stricken imagination. There is a mechanism at play, subtle but not insubstantial. Lestrade, who had been pacing impatiently at the room's edge, stepped forward. Mechanism? What are you suggesting now, Holmes? Invisible partners? Ghostly hands? This borders on charlatanry. Holmes ignored the barb, striding to the floor where Lady Whitmore had faltered. He crouched, fingers brushing the boards, then produced a small steel probe from his pocket. With delicate pressure, he pried at the seam between two planks. A faint click rewarded his effort, followed by the groan of a concealed hinge. The board lifted to reveal a narrow cavity beneath. Within lay a thin apparatus, wires stretched taut, a spring coiled in readiness, and at its heart a small canister, dusted with the unmistakable black trace of powder. Holmes lifted it carefully, his eyes alight with grim satisfaction. A device, Watson, primitive yet devilishly clever. The pressure of a foot upon this board would release the spring, emitting a faint sound and perhaps even a puff of powder or scent, enough to disorient, to seize attention, to suggest an unseen partner where none existed. And note, the board lies precisely where Lady Adelaide faltered. Lady Whitmore pressed her hand to her mouth. Then she was deceived, manipulated into believing she danced with another. Or, Holmes said softly, she was not merely deceived but marked, and this contrivance may have contained a substance capable of seeping into the air, an agent to still the heart without leaving trace. If so, Sir Malvern's confident diagnosis of heart failure serves less as explanation than as cover. Lestrade bent over the cavity, his face darkening. By heaven, Holmes, you may be right, but who would construct such a thing and for what end? Surely not Trenchard. The man is a forger, not an engineer. True, Holmes replied. But the forging hand upon both dance cards ties him to the play, whether as architect or pawn. Yet we must not overlook the powder upon Sir Malvern's letter. He too may have touched the device, whether in examination or design. Until we learn who placed this apparatus, the guilt remains distributed among them. The musicians had grown pale, their instruments clutched uncertainly. Holmes dismissed them gently, promising their discretion would be rewarded. Then he turned to Lady Whitmore. You have my gratitude, madam. Your courage has given us proof. Your sister's last dance was no natural collapse. It was engineered, as surely as the music was composed. Her eyes glistened, though she held herself erect. Then promise me, Mr. Holmes, that you will name the hand behind it. For Adelaide deserves truth, if not justice. Holmes bowed his head. You have my word. As we departed the ballroom, Holmes's stride lengthened, his mind clearly racing ahead. I followed, my thoughts whirling with dread and admiration. That hidden mechanism, so slight and sinister, had turned a night of gaiety into a death scene. Who but Holmes could have uncovered it beneath the polished steps of a quadrille? Yet even as we returned to Baker Street, I sensed that the true revelation lay not in the device itself, but in the hand that had concealed it and in the purpose for which it was set. Holmes seated himself at the table once more, the apparatus laid before him like some malignant relic. He lit his pipe, the smoke rising in thin spirals. "We are upon the threshold, Watson," he said. The ball was no mere accident of society, but a stage upon which murder rehearsed its steps. Tomorrow we shall press Trenchard harder, and Sir Malvern too. One of them knows the full choreography, and when he falters in the pattern, I shall be there to catch the misstep. Holmes remained deep in contemplation long into the night, the strange apparatus stretched before him on the table like some grotesque puzzle box torn from the underworld of invention. He examined each spring and wire, measuring the tension with his fingers, holding the canister up to the lamplight, even sniffing faintly at the residue clinging to its surface. His silence was so complete that I scarcely dared to break it, but at last, unable to resist, I ventured, "Do you believe this device alone ended Lady Adelaide's life?" He exhaled a thin stream of smoke, his sharp profile outlined against the glow. "No, Watson, it may have been the stage, but not the executioner. The mechanism was meant to unsettle, to intoxicate the imagination. It explains her yielding steps, her whispered gratitude, to empty space, her gesture of pressing the breast. But death requires more than illusion. There was another hand at work, one that seized the opportunity afforded by distraction." Then the contrivance was a lure? Precisely, a lure and a mask. Consider the scrawl upon the card, the glove imprinted with the stag's seal, the missing locket, the clock that stopped. Each is a note in a symphony, composed to conceal one single decisive act. The question is whether Trenchard, Malvern, or another entirely conducted the orchestra. I slept uneasily that night, my dreams filled with figures, gliding across shadowed ballrooms, their faces hidden, their steps inescapably drawn to some fatal cadence. By morning, Holmes was already arranging matters with his customary efficiency. He sent a message by special boy to Lestrade, demanding Trenchard be brought to Baker Street at once for questioning. Another note went discreetly to Sir Malvern, inviting him under pretext of discussing the Countess's wishes regarding the death certificate. When Lestrade arrived with the prisoner, I confess I was startled by the appearance of Basil Trenchard. He was younger than I had imagined, scarcely past 30, with a pale but handsome countenance, though the shifty gleam in his eyes betrayed his trade in falsehood. His wrists were manacled, yet he carried himself with the arrogance of one who believed fortune might still turn in his favour. "Holmes," Lestrade said with grim satisfaction, "here's your forger. He'll dance to your tune now." Holmes regarded Trenchard with cold detachment. "You are accused of forgery, sir, and perhaps of worse. I suggest candour. Why did you write upon Lady Adelaide's card the words 'last dance'?" Trenchard sneered faintly. "I wrote nothing." "You cannot prove otherwise." Holmes slid both cards across the table. The blank one with La Tempête scrawled, and Adelaide's filled entirely with the repeated words. "Your hand betrays you, Mr. Trenchard. Forgers may change letters to deceive, but the pressure of the pen remains constant. Here, the same hesitation, the same downward stroke. You wrote them. The question is, under whose command?" The prisoner paled, his confidence faltering. "I had instructions." "From whom?" Holmes's voice was like steel drawn across stone. "I never saw his face," Trenchard muttered. The note came in a sealed envelope, with payment in advance. "I was told to fill the card, nothing more." "And the glove with the stag's seal?" He shook his head vehemently. "I know nothing of gloves, I swear it. I was to write upon the card and to leave a message in the Morning Post. That is all." Holmes studied him closely, then leaned back, fingers steepled. Your ignorance is genuine in part, but not complete. You know more of the locket. Trenchard's eyes flickered. I saw it only once, blue enamel, an old piece. I swear I never touched it. But I heard whispers. It was said to contain a miniature, a portrait. Someone wanted it, someone powerful. Holmes's gaze sharpened. Who whispered it? A woman, Trenchard stammered, then bit his lip. I cannot name her. You will, or face not only forgery, but murder, Holmes said, his tone now cutting with icy authority. The prisoner's resolve broke. Very well. It was the lady's companion, Miss Clara Ventham. She met me in secret and pressed the instructions into my hand. She said it was for a jest, to amuse the ball. I swear I believed it harmless. At this revelation, Holmes's eyes gleamed. A jest. Rarely have I heard murder cloaked in so poor a costume. Very well, Trenchard, you may yet save your neck by telling the truth, though the noose of forgery still waits. He turned to Lestrade. See that Miss Clara Ventham is secured at once. She is the key to this affair. As Lestrade departed with his prisoner, Sir Malvern arrived unsuspecting, his heavy tread and polished manners belying the disquiet I now recognized beneath. Holmes received him coldly. Sir Malvern, he said, we are grateful for your attendance. A matter of medical certainty remains in dispute. Lady Adelaide, you insist, died of the heart. Indeed, the physician replied firmly. There can be no doubt. Holmes gestured to the apparatus upon the table. And how, Sir Malvern, do you account for this device, concealed beneath the ballroom floor, filled with powder of suspicious composition? Powder which I note stains your own correspondence. The doctor's face blanched. I had no knowledge. Holmes's voice grew fierce. No knowledge, and yet you declared her heart at fault with such haste that no inquiry was permitted. You would have sealed her coffin before the locket was missed, before the dance card was found, before the clock's silence was explained. Why such eagerness, unless you feared discovery? Sir Malvern's hands trembled. You dare accuse me of murder? I accuse you of complicity, Holmes said, his voice low, taut with certainty. You are a man of science. You recognized at once that her collapse bore signs inconsistent with simple heart failure. Yet instead of declaring suspicion, you smothered it. Why? Because the true cause implicated one whom you sought to protect. The doctor sagged into a chair, his composure unravelled. I could not expose her. It was the companion, Miss Ventham. She came to me weeks ago speaking of Adelaide's frailties. She pressed upon me that, should anything occur, it must be described as natural for the sake of the family's honour. I thought it eccentricity, not conspiracy. When the moment came, I obeyed what I believed to be a sister's desperate plea. Holmes leaned closer, his eyes alight. Not a sister's plea, Sir Malvern, a murderess's demand. You were used, as surely as Trenchard was, but your silence nearly let her triumph. The physician buried his face in his hands. God forgive me. Holmes rose abruptly, his form taut with the force of his deduction. Watson, the net draws tight. Miss Clara Ventham is at the heart of this labyrinth. We must see her before she contrives another masquerade, for the last dance of Lady Whitmore was not hers alone. The companion meant to lead all of us in that fatal measure, until truth itself was forced to bow. Miss Clara Ventham was brought to Baker Street under Lestrade's supervision the following afternoon. I confess, when she entered our sitting room, I was struck less by the appearance of a hardened conspirator than by the fragile elegance of a woman accustomed to shadows rather than the spotlight. She was of middle height, with auburn hair arranged modestly, her eyes large and downcast, though when they lifted, There burned within them a wary intelligence. She wore no jewellery, no ornament, and her gloved hands twisted nervously together as though to conceal some inner tremor. Holmes observed her with that singular detachment of his, which I knew masked an almost predatory alertness. He did not rise at once, but remained seated, the curious contrivance from the ballroom still resting upon the table between us like some unholy relic. Clara Bentham's gaze faltered at the sight of it, a subtle start she no doubt wished to suppress, but Holmes saw it and filed it away instantly. "Miss Bentham," he began, his tone deceptively courteous, "you served as Lady Adelaide's companion these past 2 years. You knew her habits, her confidences, her weaknesses perhaps better than her own kin. You also, it seems, knew how to speak with forgers, to send cryptic notes to newspapers, and to influence physicians in their diagnoses. Quite the repertoire for one in your station." She looked up at him with sudden spirit, her lips tightening. "You accuse without proof. I have committed no crime. My devotion to Lady Adelaide was known to all." "Devotion," Holmes repeated, the word tasting sour upon his tongue. "Yet devotion writes last dance upon a lady's card. Devotion plants powder beneath her feet. Devotion robs her of the locket she cherished above all things." Clara's composure wavered, but she steadied herself. The locket was not hers to cherish. It belonged to another, long before she claimed it. She held in that trinket, the ruin of a man. At this, Holmes leaned forward sharply. "Ah, at last we glimpse the motive. You speak of the miniature within, the portrait whispered of in society. Who was it, Miss Bentham, whose likeness was sealed away, dangerous enough to kill for?" Her lips pressed tightly together. "I will not say." Holmes rose then, suddenly and with quiet menace, circling her as though she were prey in his drawing-room's snare. "Then permit me to say it. It was a man of influence, whose indiscretion with Lady Adelaide, if revealed, would unravel not only his honour, but the security of a name still potent in political circles. That miniature was the chain about his throat, and you, whether as his agent, his lover, or his victim, took it upon yourself to sever that chain." Her breath came faster, her hands clasped tightly upon her lap. Yet she did not speak. Holmes struck the table with his hand, startling us all. "Enough of silence. You guided Adelaide into that final dance. You arranged the mechanism that unsettled her mind, that made her steps falter toward the shadow of an unseen partner. You contrived the illusion, and in the moment of distraction, you relieved her of the locket. But Adelaide's strength surprised you. She did not swoon at once, and so you turned to the physician beforehand, ensuring that when the time came, he would shield you with a verdict of nature. You sought to bury truth with her body." Clara rose suddenly, her composure broken. "No, I did not mean for her to die." The words rang in the room like a confession, and she sank back, trembling. Holmes's voice softened, though it lost none of its sharpness. "Then tell us what you did mean, for you are no fool, Miss Bentham. You must have known that such contrivances rarely end without harm." Her eyes glistened as she lifted them toward us. "I wanted only the locket. It contained proof. Proof that Adelaide once entangled a man whose marriage, whose very seat in Parliament would be destroyed if it were known. He was my benefactor once, before scandal cast me adrift. I wished only to reclaim what was his. She flaunted her power over him, mocked me with her possession of that miniature. I thought if I could recover it, I might restore myself to his favour. The device was meant to bewilder her, to give me the moment to snatch it unseen. That is all." Holmes's eyes narrowed. Yet she fell dead upon the floor. "I swear," Clara cried, "I touched her not. I took the locket, yes, but I left her alive. When she curtsied to the empty air, she still smiled. Then she gasped and collapsed. I never poisoned her. I never struck her. I wanted only the portrait. Holmes regarded her in silence, the smoke from his pipe curling in slow spirals. "Watson," he said at length, "note how guilt confesses what innocence denies. She admits to theft, to trickery, to conspiracy, but she denies the final act. This rings with a certain truth, for murderers seldom proclaim their part so eagerly, when they might remain hidden altogether." Lestrade, who had been listening with mounting impatience, interjected, "Then who killed her, Holmes? If not this woman, then who? The forger is but a pawn, the doctor but a coward. If she is not the executioner, who is?" Holmes tapped his fingers upon the table, his eyes half closed. "The answer lies still with the locket itself. Miss Bentham admits she seized it. But where is it now?" Clara hesitated, then produced from within her bodice a small object wrapped in linen. She laid it upon the table with trembling fingers. Holmes unwrapped it carefully, revealing the enamelled blue surface of the missing locket. He pressed the catch, and the miniature was revealed. A painted likeness of a man, stern of brow, his features unmistakable even in tiny strokes. Lestrade leaned closer and whistled softly. "By thunder, that's Lord Ashcombe." Holmes nodded gravely. "A statesman of considerable influence, a scandal if unveiled indeed, but scandal does not kill. There is still the matter of what substance may have entered Lady Adelaide's body that night, and for that, Watson, I must rely upon your medical expertise. We must examine the remains before the coffin is sealed, for only in her body lies the proof of whether she died of heart, of poison, or of terror itself." Clara Bentham sobbed softly, her strength spent. Lestrade signalled the constable to take her into custody, though Holmes lifted a hand. "She is guilty, but not yet of murder. The hand that struck the final note remains hidden, but it trembles now, for the dance draws near its end." And as the locket lay open upon our table, the painted face of Lord Ashcombe staring back at us, I felt the chill certainty that the affair had reached beyond drawing-rooms and jealousies, into the perilous realm of power, where reputations were guarded more fiercely than life itself. Holmes's eyes gleamed. "The music quickens, Watson. We must keep pace, or be trampled beneath the measure." The locket lay open between us, its tiny portrait gleaming beneath the lamplight like a secret that had finally broken the surface. Holmes studied it with an expression I knew well, his features composed, his eyes burning with the fervour of discovery, his mind racing ahead into territories still veiled to me. Lestrade shifted uneasily, plainly aware that the likeness of Lord Ashcombe implicated a figure far beyond the comfortable reach of Scotland Yard. Clara Bentham, pale and exhausted from her confession, sat slumped in her chair, her gaze fixed on the miniature, as though it were both her salvation and her ruin. Holmes closed the locket with a deliberate snap and slipped it into his pocket. "This trinket, Watson," he said, "is the fulcrum upon which the entire affair pivots. Its possession was motive enough for Miss Bentham to conspire, for Trenchard to lend his hand, for Sir Malvern to guard his tongue. Yet motive alone does not extinguish life. Lady Adelaide's collapse was the culmination of a plan far more intricate. The question that remains is this: who stood to gain by ensuring she would never again open her lips to reveal what she held over Lord Ashcombe? Lestrade muttered, "If you drag his name into open court, Holmes, you'll rattle the whole government. I'll need more than speculation." "Quite so," Holmes replied. "And we shall have more. But first, Watson, we must do what Sir Malvern sought to prevent. We must examine Lady Adelaide herself." I felt a chill course through me at the thought, but I nodded. "If the truth lies in her body, Holmes, It must not be buried. Arrangements were swiftly made, and before dusk we found ourselves in a dim chamber of the Whitmore house, where Lady Adelaide's form lay in solemn repose. The shutters were drawn, candles flickered low, and the air was heavy with lilies. Lady Whitmore, though worn by grief, gave her permission with quiet resolve. "If my sister was wronged," she said, "I beg you find it. Let the world know her not as a victim of whimsy, but of deliberate malice." Holmes bowed with grave respect, then turned the task to me. "Watson, you have the steadier hand. I require your eyes and your judgment. We need not a full dissection, but a careful search for any sign inconsistent with a natural seizure." With reverent caution I began my examination, Holmes watching intently, every flicker of my gaze mirrored in the sharpness of his own. Lady Adelaide's features were serene, her lips faintly parted. At first I saw little amiss, but when I gently parted the fabric at her neckline, I detected upon the skin the faintest discoloration, a pale ring, scarcely perceptible, encircling the place where her chain had rested. More curious still was a subtle mark near the corner of her mouth, a residue of bitterness I could not attribute to natural causes. "Holmes," I whispered, "this is no failure of the heart. There is evidence here of an irritant, perhaps an alkaloid introduced in minute quantity. The lips suggest a substance ingested or inhaled. Combined with her sudden collapse, it points to poisoning." Holmes's eyes gleamed with grim satisfaction. "As I surmised. And now we must ask, by what medium was it delivered? A glass, a sweet, or—" His gaze turned toward the slippers we had examined days earlier. He lifted one again, studied the faint dust upon its sole, and then sniffed it delicately. "Yes, there is more here than chalk. Watson, do you detect it?" I bent close. A faint acrid tang rose from the satin, unmistakable now that I sought it. "Powder, absorbed into the very fabric." "Precisely," Holmes said. "The device beneath the floor released a vapour when triggered, a vapour infused with this agent. As Lady Adelaide danced, she drew it in, her movements hastening its work upon her system. By the time she reached her curtsy, the poison had stilled."
Her heart, ingenious, diabolical, and calculated with chilling precision. Lady Whitmore covered her mouth in horror, but her voice remained steady. "Then it was murder beyond doubt." Holmes nodded gravely. "Yes, madam. The dance was orchestrated for her alone. But the identity of the conductor remains concealed. Miss Ventham admits theft, but not murder. Sir Malvern shielded her, but out of weakness, not malice. Trenchard played his part, but without comprehension. There is yet one hand unseen, the one who conceived the stratagem, who commanded the others like pieces on a board." Lestrade scowled. "And you mean to suggest that hand belongs to Lord Ashcombe?" Holmes did not answer at once. He paced the chamber, his gaze darting from the body to the shadowed corners, as though the very air might whisper the truth if he pressed it hard enough. At last he spoke, his voice low. "Lord Ashcombe's likeness in the locket makes him vulnerable, but vulnerability is not motive for murder unless combined with fear. Did he fear exposure so greatly as to contrive this elaborate masquerade? Or did another, someone closer to Lady Adelaide, use his secret as the perfect mask for their crime?" I asked quietly. "Do you suspect Lady Whitmore?" Holmes shook his head. "No, her grief is genuine. She seeks truth, not concealment. But there may be others within the Whitmore circle, relations, suitors, rivals, who would profit from Adelaide's silence." The Countess's eyes widened. "There was one, Mr. Geoffrey Markham, a cousin distantly tied to our family estate. He pressed Adelaide often for assistance with debts. She refused. He left the house in anger weeks ago." Holmes's expression sharpened. "Markham, Yes, a man desperate enough to seek fortune through intrigue. I must learn whether he has the mechanical wit to fashion such a device, or whether he employed another hand. He closed the shutters, extinguished the candles, save one, and replaced the sheet with reverence. Then he turned to us with sudden intensity. Tomorrow we confront Lord Ashcombe himself. His reaction will tell us whether he is the desperate hand behind this tragedy, or merely the shadow whose portrait was misused. And from his answer, Watson, the web will unravel at last. The dance is nearly ended, but the final partner has not yet bowed. As we left the chamber, I could not shake the chill that clung to me, nor the image of Lady Adelaide's faint smile, frozen in death. Holmes's words echoed in my mind, the thought that somewhere, among peers of the realm or the shadows of family, the true murderer still moved freely, waiting for the last steps of this deadly quadrille to be played. Holmes strode ahead, his face set, his eyes burning. I knew he scented the endgame approaching, and with it, revelation. The following morning broke with a raw wind that drove the fog in tatters across the city, and Holmes, more animated than I had seen him,
Since the case began, made ready with a swiftness that startled even me. He had arranged, by means of a letter couched in the most diplomatic of terms, for us to wait upon Lord Ashcombe at his club. I confess my heart beat faster as the hour approached, for here at last we might face the man whose likeness in the locket had cast so long and perilous a shadow. The club was one of those stately establishments in Pall Mall where the hush of carpet and the gleam of brass conspired to remind its members of their consequence. Lord Ashcombe received us in a private room, tall and austere, his hair silvered at the temples, his features those of the miniature now sealed in Holmes's pocket. His manner was calm, but the flicker in his eyes betrayed the unease of a man who knows some unwelcome truth is about to be laid before him. "Mr. Holmes," he said, inclining his head with measured courtesy. "Dr. Watson, I have read of your exploits, though I confess I had not expected the dubious honour of your scrutiny." Holmes bowed slightly. "My lord, it is never my wish to intrude upon the affairs of gentlemen of rank, but a lady lies dead, and her final moments are entangled with your image. I must therefore speak plainly." Lord Ashcombe's lips tightened. "Say what you must." Holmes produced the locket and placed it upon the table. The nobleman's hand twitched, though he did not reach for it. His gaze lingered upon the blue enamel, then upon the faint seam of its hinge. "So it has resurfaced," he said quietly. "I had hoped never to see it again." Holmes's voice was cold and precise. "Within lies your likeness, my lord. It was in Lady Adelaide's possession on the night of her death. It was taken from her body, even as she drew her last breath. Do you deny knowledge of how she came to keep it?" Ashcombe drew himself up, though I noted the sheen of perspiration upon his brow. "Years ago, when I was young and less prudent, I permitted an artist to capture my likeness. Lady Adelaide was fond of collecting such trifles. I did not imagine it still existed." Holmes's eyes gleamed. "Trifles, you say? Yet trifles can unseat governments when wielded by the wrong hand. My lord, that miniature was motive enough for theft, for conspiracy, perhaps for murder. The question before us is whether you merely feared scandal, or whether you contrived to silence Lady Adelaide forever." For a moment the silence was so taut I could hear the tick of the clock upon the mantel. Then Ashcombe spoke, his voice low but firm. "I loved her once. Whatever folly there was, it was not hatred. I had no hand in her death." Holmes studied him with relentless intensity. "Then who, my lord? For the conspiracy around her last dance was no common intrigue. A forger was employed, a physician silenced, a companion pressed into theft, and a mechanism installed beneath the floor of her ballroom. These pieces were not gathered by accident. Ashcombe's composure wavered. He rose, paced, then turned upon us with sudden bitterness. It was Geoffrey Markham. He came to me weeks ago, boasting of debts soon to be repaid. He hinted that he possessed means to free me of Adelaide's hold. I warned him against rashness, but he laughed, saying he would stage a performance society would never forget. I dismissed it as drunken fancy. God help me, I see now what he meant. Holmes's eyes flashed with triumph, though his tone remained cool. Markham, then, is the architect. He had the desperation, the arrogance, and the proximity. He manipulated Miss Ventham with promises, Trenchard with money, and Malvern with pressure. He alone stood to gain both from Adelaide's silence and from the family fortune that might trickle his way once scandal was averted. My lord, you are guilty of folly, but Markham is guilty of design. Lestrade, who had accompanied us silently, could restrain himself no longer. That's the rope for Markham, if we can seize him. Holmes raised a hand. Do not be too eager, Inspector. Men like Markham are bold, but not foolish. He will suspect the net is drawing and may already be preparing his flight. We must outstep him in his own dance. Lord Ashcombe sank into a chair, his proud shoulders bowed. If what you say is true, then I am in your debt, Mr. Holmes. I ask only that my name not be dragged further than necessary. The portrait, burn it if you will. Let the dead keep their secrets. Holmes regarded him for a long moment, then slipped the locket once more into his pocket. The dead have already spoken, my lord, but their words shall be measured with care. We departed swiftly, the winter air cutting sharp against our faces as we hailed a cab back toward Baker Street. Holmes was alight with energy, his long fingers drumming upon his knee. Watson, tonight we lay the final snare. Markham believes himself unseen, but he will not resist the temptation to recover the locket. He knows it alone ties him to his crime. We shall let him come to us. And if he does not? I asked. He will, Holmes said with quiet certainty. For men like Markham cannot abide an unfinished measure. He began the dance, he must complete it. That evening our rooms were darkened, save for a single lamp upon the table, where the locket lay glinting like bait upon a hook. Holmes and I waited in silence, revolvers at hand, Lestrade concealed beyond the door. The hours crept by, the city's noises fading into the stillness of midnight. Then at last the faintest creak upon the stair, the stealth of a foot, seeking silence but betraying itself to Holmes's trained ear. He gestured to me, and we waited, hearts pounding. The door eased open, and a figure slipped within, a man cloaked and masked, his hand reaching straight for the locket, as though the world held nothing else. Holmes sprang forward with the swiftness of a striking hawk, seizing the intruder's arm and
wrenching away the mask. The lamplight fell upon the pale, desperate features of Geoffrey Markham. For an instant he struggled like a cornered animal, but Lestrade burst in, and between us we subdued him. Holmes's eyes blazed with triumph. The dance is ended, Markham. You led it with cunning, but you misstepped at the last. Lady Adelaide bows from the grave, and you shall bow before the law. Markham spat a curse, his face twisted with rage and despair. She would have ruined us all. I only did what necessity demanded. Holmes's voice cut like a blade. Necessity is the mask of villains. Justice shall strip it away. And as the constables bore him from our rooms, I felt the strange hush of resolution descend, as though the echo of that fatal quadrille had at last ceased to reverberate through our lives. Holmes stood by the window, gazing into the fog, his face unreadable. "Watson," he murmured, Life is a series of measures, some harmonious, some discordant. But murder always plays out of tune. Our task is only to hear the false note. And with that, he turned back to the table, where the locket lay closed, its secret portrait hidden once more as the night swallowed the city beyond. The arrest of Geoffrey Markham sent tremors through Portland Place and beyond. Within days, the press was awash with speculation, though the full particulars never reached their greedy columns, thanks in no small measure to Holmes's careful management of what was disclosed. Lady Whitmore, though grief-stricken, bore herself with quiet dignity, and her composure did much to preserve her sister's memory from scandal. Miss Clara Ventham, spared the charge of murder but not of complicity, was released into obscurity, her ambitions shattered. Sir Malvern Hatherley, his reputation bruised by his cowardly compliance, withdrew from society's gaze. Basil Trenchard, for his part, returned to the custody of the Yard, where his forgeries assured him no leniency. Yet it was Geoffrey Markham upon whom justice at last descended. The evidence Holmes laid before the magistrates, the forged dance card, the concealed device in the ballroom floor, the powder upon the slippers, and the testimony of those misled into his service, was incontrovertible. His motive was laid bare. Debts so vast that only a desperate scheme could satisfy them, combined with envy of Adelaide's power and influence. By orchestrating her death under the guise of scandal, he hoped to profit from her silence and shield himself behind the shadow of Lord Ashcombe's portrait. His vanity betrayed him, however, for in crafting so elaborate a mask, he left behind traces only Holmes's relentless eye could see. On the evening after Markham's committal, I found Holmes in his chair by the fire, the locket resting upon the table beside him. He regarded it with a curious mixture of triumph and melancholy. "You see, Watson," he said at length, "how men weave nets from their own
fears. Adelaide herself was not blameless. She kept a weapon in that locket, a portrait she wielded for her advantage. Markham feared it, Ventham coveted it, Ashcombe dreaded it, and so they danced about her, each playing a step in the pattern, until one hand, Markham's, forced the final bow. The others were accomplices, witting or not, but he alone struck the fatal chord. I nodded, though my gaze lingered upon the locket. And what of this? Does it not still hold the power to ruin? Holmes lifted it between his fingers, the enamel glinting in the firelight. It does. But truth, Watson, must be tempered with mercy. The dead cannot defend themselves, nor can they benefit from exposure. Lady Whitmore has suffered enough. Lord Ashcombe's folly lies in the past, and Markham's guilt is sufficient to account for the present. This token, therefore, must vanish from the board. Without flourish, he opened the grate and let the locket fall into the flames. The enamel cracked, the miniature curled and blackened, and in moments it was reduced to ash. I could not help exclaiming, "Holmes, you destroy the last piece of proof." He smiled faintly, his eyes never leaving the fire. Proof enough remains, but some relics serve only to feed the carrion appetites of scandal. Better it perish here than in the hands of men who would twist it to their ends. The law has Markham, the Countess has her truth, and I— He settled back into his chair, the lines of his face softening. I have the satisfaction of hearing the discordant note resolved. The flames crackled softly, the room bathed in their glow. Outside, London's fog pressed against the window panes, indifferent as ever to triumph or tragedy. Yet in that quiet chamber I felt the rare stillness that comes when justice, however imperfect, has been done. Holmes closed his eyes and murmured, "The last dance is ended, Watson. Let us hope the music rests a while before the next begins." And with that, the case of Lady Whitmore's final bow was consigned to memory. Another chapter in the strange chronicles of Baker Street, where truth is ever stranger and darker than fiction.